Since May 11th.
Oh, yeah, it's still back out there.
This may say something. Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this joint meeting between the City Council, Downtown Development Authority, Planning Commission, and Zoning Board of Appeals. The last time the city hosted a joint meeting was in May 2021, except we had one last night. So May 2021 and last night. The two joint workshops we are having this week are intended to bring all of our boards and commissioners together to discuss the topics related to our master plan review, consisting of parking, development, infrastructure, and much more. The master plan is an important document that helps determine the future of our city, and we look forward to everyone's input and hard work that will go into this. We are encouraging maximum participation from members of all of our boards and commissions this evening. In order to best do this, we will be breaking up the presentation into sections, and after each section, Joe Tangari will pause the presentation to allow for input and questions. So during the presentation, please feel free to write down any questions or comments you may have to share during the dedicated portion of commenting. If you could also please state your name and the board that you serve on before your question, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, thank you so much for attending at this point. Joe Tangari from Giffords Webster will provide the presentation. Joe, thank you for being here 2 days in a row.
All right. Getting the presentation up on the screen and we should be good to go. Okay. So yes, we were here last night doing the same presentation. We wanted to give people multiple opportunities to attend because we know everyone's got full schedules. So thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it. And if you were also here last night, well, double thank you. So by way of introduction, we have master plan updates underway in the city. One is focused on the downtown and the other is more general to the whole city. For the benefit of anyone who might be following along on YouTube or at home otherwise, and just isn't familiar with the process, a master plan is a document that state law charges the Planning Commission with creating. However, the City Council may also choose to adopt a master plan. And in our case, the DDA is also kind of developing its master plan to transmit to the Planning Commission, just like it did last time. We are charged with reviewing our master plan every 5 years. The general master plan was last completed in 2018, so we're at the 5-year mark. The downtown master plan was adopted in 2016, so we're a little beyond the 5-year mark there. However, the master plan for the downtown has been reviewed in that time frame multiple times, so it's just this time we decided we needed to make a couple of updates. We do have a public input platform that is live now, a couple upcoming workshops, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. And we'll also have a link to that current survey at the end of the presentation. When we look at the scope of the work that we're doing here, so the downtown master plan is being funded by the DDA. It's an update of that 2016 plan. And the elements of that plan include updating our 2016 assessment of the downtown. We've already done the walkabout for that, but we're looking at the streetscape and building facades and circulation and things like that. Reviewing parking and traffic assessments that have been recently completed and providing an analysis of potential opportunities for more parking. Analyzing the potential for a 14-mile road diet with diagonal parking that would vastly increase the supply of parking spaces in the downtown. And then we will be doing a public workshop in November and an accompanying survey. All of our in-person workshops and opportunities for input will be mirrored online in case you can't make it to those occasions. We'll look at the general master plan, the scope of that. This is funded by the city. It's a subject-focused update on the 2018 master plan. So we identified a few modules that we wanted to study in greater depth. than the 2018 plan did. One is infrastructure, and that includes roads, water and sewer, all of our stormwater management. The Baker and Shalom sites, parking more generally as it occurs across the city, not just in the downtown. Sustainability and resiliency, mixed use development, and some corridor assessments for the BRD1 district, which is on South Main, the BRD2 district, which is along Crooks and then wraps along part of Maple, North Main, really between Elwood and the downtown, and then West 14 Mile between downtown and the larger shopping centers over by Crooks Road. And we're going to get into a little bit more detail on each of those modules. Before we do that, though, we just want to talk a little bit about the context in which we're doing all this planning. So just looking at the population, a little bit about the economics and housing in the city. So our population peaked in 1970, 17,617. In 2010, we were at about 11,825, and we're down about 3.8% since then to 11,389. SEMCOG, the regional planning organization, does project that we'll go up a little bit by 2050, but only a little bit. SEMCOG's projections do tend to be fairly conservative, but regionally, when we look at how the population breaks down, we're seeing a decline of school-age children. Clawson's not an exception to that. You can see the numbers up there. We're down in all three age groups that are under 20 years old. And we just look around the neighboring communities to see what's going on with each of them. Troy is the one with the most room to grow and accordingly grew the most. Berkeley and Royal Oak have both managed to grow a little bit. Oakland County itself has grown about 6%, which is more than the state of Michigan overall, which did grow 2%. There was a lot of doomsaying back before 2010 about how Michigan is going to keep losing population. Well, that actually did not happen from 2010 to 2020. We did lose a little bit from 2000 to 2010, so it started a lot of hand-wringing. Clawson and Madison Heights are the two communities in the local area that have lost a little bit of population. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of the dynamics behind that are on the following slides. So part of it is down to households. We have about 5,600 households in town, down a little bit from 2000. Less than 20% of our households have children. 42% of our households are single-person households. So that is a big contributor to the fact that we've lost a little bit of population because those numbers are up. We've had a big decline in household size. Royal Oak is the only local area city with a lower average household size at 1.97 people per household. Clawson's right at 2.02. If you look at the change from 2010 to 2020, we went from 2.14 to 2.02. And if that is, of course, an average, but it's a decent decline and a bigger decline than most other communities in the area, Madison Heights being the exception. Everybody dropped. Michigan at large, Oakland County, the United States of America, they all have a smaller household size than they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It's been a steady decline. But we are very low here. We also have a population of seniors living alone that has grown quite a bit in the last 10 years and now accounts for 15% of all households in the city. We look at housing, a little disclaimer here. These numbers are drawn from the American Community Survey. So sometimes two numbers that seem like they should be the exact same number or just like a little bit off. And that's because the American Community Survey works with estimates that are drawn from a sample And there is a margin of error. So sometimes the numbers don't match exactly one for one. I just wanted that to be clear to anyone who's looking closely at the numbers and thinking, what's going on here? Why are there differences between some of these numbers? But we have about a 3.6% vacancy rate in housing, which is really actually not that bad. It means you have a housing market essentially. Michigan's population rose about 2% from 2010 to 2020, and housing units across the state grew about 0.8%. So obviously, a lot of houses have more than one person in them, most of them do. So the number of housing units isn't going to grow at the same rate as the population necessarily, but they seem to track pretty closely. We are 71% owner occupied and 24% renter occupied in Clawson. That's quite a bit higher rate of owner occupancy than the United States in general. We have about 252 vacant units as of 2021. The vacancy rate on the left-hand side of the slide is from the census in 2020. We have a very small population in group quarters as well. This is things like congregate senior living homes where you don't have a full separate unit, but you're receiving care or something like that. About 119 people in some sort of group quarter situation. Which is something to think about when we think about, our population getting older, a lot of seniors living alone, perhaps occupying a house that they've lived in for a very long time on their own, and perhaps thinking about where they're going to go next and not having a ton of options within the city. Just looking at housing permits, what the activity has been like over the last 23 years. We've had 69 new single-family residences built, 23 attached condos, 114 multifamily units, and we've had 36 units demolished. So our net total is 170 new units over the last 23 years. Looking a little bit at our economic data, our median household income is a fair amount higher than the Michigan median household income. We're at 76. Michigan's about 64. It's risen a fair amount actually in real terms from 2010, going from 67 to 76. We have a fairly high rate of high school graduation in town, quite a bit higher than the US rate. We have a somewhat lower rate of college degrees in town. We're at 32%. The US as a whole is at 37.9%. Fairly steady poverty rate in town, about 7.5%. We looked a little bit at where people were working, and people who work in Clawson actually come primarily from Clawson. That's the plurality, 17.5%. Royal Oak, Madison Heights, Troy, and Rochester Hills are the other biggest contributors to our daytime population. And when we look at where Clawson residents work, Troy is the #1 destination, followed by Detroit, Clawson itself, Royal Oak, and Southfield. About 80% of workers from Clawson drove to work alone in 2021. It's actually down from 84% in 2020. Most of the growth, or most of the reduction there, is due to an increase in carpooling. And then also the big deal here is in 2010, we had 280 people working from home, and now we have about 1,930. So that's changed a lot, and we all know why. Between the march of technology and the disruption caused by the pandemic, just a lot more people are working from home now. Our mean travel time to work for residents was 19.8 minutes in 2021. That was actually down from where it was in 2010 by a couple of minutes, which is actually fairly consequential for quality of life. The less time you're spending traveling to and from work is more time you have for other things that you want to be doing. We have a pause moment here with this lovely photo by Glenn Shepherd. And if anybody has any comments or questions, this is the time to chime in.
I have a few questions, Joe.
Sure.
Just more clarifying questions. You talked a little bit about the population between 2010 and 2020, and there was that describing that decline.
Mhm.
Was there, I know you provided some context in, 42% are single person households, but was there a reason why for the decline?
I think it's mostly just that gradually our household size is declining and we're not adding a ton of households. So as those households are thinning out a bit, and it's mostly due to an aging population, you're seeing the population tick down, and you don't have a lot of larger households coming in to make up the loss. Back in 1970, when our population peaked, there were 5 kids in every house, and we simply just don't have that now. We have less than 20% of our households have any school-age children in them to begin with, whereas back in 1970, it was closer to 50%. Had some school-age children. So that's really the primary dynamic. And we're going to be looking into, this is actually a question posed by Glenn last night, looking into so if people buy their first home in Clawson, do they also buy their second home in Clawson when they move, or are they moving when they have a family and they're going somewhere else? Which could also explain some of the decline in population if they're not staying here as their household expands and adds more people.
And was there any explanation why SEMCOG is projecting an increase in population by 2050?
No, not really. I think they base that mostly on a projection of just stability in town, and that we have relative stability here. I think they look at the number of housing units that are being added, and they figure we're going to have some more households over that time, and it's likely that the population is going to remain essentially stable because they're only predicting a very marginal increase, and that essentially equates to a stable population.
Okay, I have one last clarifying question. You mentioned the median household income, and there was an increase between 2010 and 2020. Was that 76 that difference between 76,000 and 67,000? Was that adjusted for inflation?
Yeah, that is in real modern dollars. Yeah.
Okay, the other thing too, to keep in mind is that in 2010, we were coming out of a major recession.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Things were depressed in 2010. Yeah. And that's something that kind of haunts all the statistics when you do a comparison of 2020 to 2010, is that we were at a real low ebb in 2010.
Wouldn't the household size also be attributable to the fact that our housing market is very good for entry level first-time buyers, and a lot of those people are single home buyers, and then also the fact that we do have an aging population and people tend to not leave. So we've got the young ones on one end, younger people on one end, and then the older people on the other end that kind of balance that whole thing out.
Yeah,
Just the stock of housing that we have, along with the size and the dollar value for it.
that's definitely true. Yeah, that's really part of what drives it. Is that we have a lot of people just starting out and a lot of people who have been through the family raising phase, and they're now either on their own or just a couple. And yeah, it leads to an overall very small household size. Anything else? All right. So we've got a survey live right now, as I mentioned earlier. To date, we've had about 350 people complete at least one portion of the survey. There are several portions which are listed up there on the slide. some general questions, some things about housing, budgeting, parking, sustainability and resiliency, biking and walking. And we have a map where people can pin some concerns that they have about various topics, including flooding. And that is going to be up. It went live in early September. It's going to be up through October. We've put out a recent push for some more respondents. We do have a goal that we're trying to get to in terms of respondents. And we will keep pushing until we get to that number or close to it anyway.
Do you have any early results? Anything you can talk to?
I guess I could probably highlight a few.
I don't want you to bias the poll.
Well, yeah, right, yeah. There probably are a few things that could be highlighted. You know, looking at the mapping concerns, you're really starting to see where people are pinning concentrations on the map, particularly as it relates to where they've experienced incidents of flooding. So it kind of starts to point us to, okay, we have some clear problem areas, you know, and my guess is the DPW probably is aware of the worst problem areas, but you also have a lot of incidents that don't get called in. So that can kind of help us understand where there are perceived problems, even if there weren't reported problems too. So yeah, that's one of the early returns that I think has been kind of promising for our framework building. Do have some upcoming opportunities. November 14th, DDA Master Plan Workshop. We'll be getting some information out about that soon. Upcoming opportunities will be primarily workshop based. We're going to mirror all those opportunities online for people who can't make it. We also have some paper copies of the survey. If for some reason you are unable to take a survey online or just uncomfortable taking a survey online, they are located. Nick, remind me where they're located.
Just every municipal building, city hall, Hunter Community Center, library, and the DPW.
Excellent. Yeah, so the other workshops relating to the general master plan modules are yet to be scheduled, but we'll be getting them on the calendar soon. And when we do have a plan drafted, there will be an open house that we will use to share where we've arrived with the public and solicit their feedback. Anticipate that will happen sometime in early 2024. So when we think about what we come away with from a master plan doesn't change anything on its own. It is a plan. And, you know, when you see a future land use map, it doesn't change any zoning. We have to actually take additional steps to do that. But it needs to provide a guide to implementation. Otherwise, it's just a plan with no legs. It doesn't go anywhere after it's adopted. So the plan establishes ways forward that generally fall into a couple of categories. One of them is frameworks and the other one is action plans. So a framework guides how we're going to study a given problem to arrive at some decisions about that problem. And then an action plan gives us something really specific that we can do to implement our plan and meet the goals that we set. So action plan, like each individual action that comes in your action plan will fall under a different category. So a lot of them will be zoning. We use zoning ordinances to implement master plans, are kind of the primary tool. So we might have a very specific action item that says, you know, do this with this section of your zoning ordinance. We might have action items that are more advocacy based, where we are planning to do some outreach or education on a given topic so that we can move the ball forward on that. We also have capital improvement related action items. And those would inform our actual capital improvement plan, which is something that's updated annually and actually identifies dollar amounts that are going to be put toward some sort of physical improvement for the city or asset that we're going to acquire. For instance, fixing a specific length of road or replacing a specific length of water main in a specific location, buying a fire truck, that kind of thing is what goes into a capital improvement plan. Diving into the modules of the master plan update, the first module deals with infrastructure, includes our thoroughfare plan. That's something that in a built-out community like Clawson doesn't tend to change very much from plan to plan, because you have your roads that are classified as major thoroughfares and your local roads and your collectors, and they tend to keep the same role over time. We're going to be looking at complete streets and the non-motorized transportation. Trying to add a little bit more detail and flesh out the action items on that from the last plan. A road maintenance framework and a water and sewer framework. We're not actually doing capital improvement planning here. We are not identifying a specific road in these frameworks, but what we're doing is we're basically laying out a way of a method of approach to determining what should be prioritized when we do our capital improvement planning. And then we are also going to be talking about green infrastructure and flood prevention. Because those two things can go hand in hand. So roads and public utilities are the primary focus here. City does have older infrastructure, just like most of Southeast Michigan. We have a combined storm and sanitary sewer system. And we're all aware of the problems that can occur with that. Its maintenance is a major cost center. A lot of communities whose infrastructure is newer just don't know what's in store for them in the future. In terms of keeping their infrastructure up, we are definitely at that point where we're learning exactly how much it costs to keep things up. Taxes do pay for upkeep, and with no room to expand a built-out city, revenue growth really comes from a few different places. One is redevelopment. One is property changing hands, which uncaps the property taxes, because we have Headley and Prop A that keep property taxes for a given owner from rising more than a certain amount every year. And then increased taxes, of course, is the other way that you can grow your revenue. So when we think about that, redevelopment is really our primary form of development here. It's a new development on previously developed sites. Couple ways that a built out community can grow in the absence of places to build out. So you can build up. You also have what we're calling strategic density, where you identify certain parts of the city that can handle a little bit more intensity of use. And that's not just, people think automatically about housing units when we say the word density, but that's not the only thing we're talking about. We're also talking about density of commercial activity. Downtown, of course, is the densest part of town for both things. But we have to be thinking about where else in the community those things might make a certain amount of sense. So industrial, commercial, and mixed use development, of course, have the highest taxable value of any property. So when we think about what we want the burden to be on our residents in the future, we have to think about the costs that we're incurring and the receipts that we're receiving, and how we can use development to create a friendlier environment for our residents from a tax perspective. We have some images here from the 2016 downtown plan that were used to ask residents and business owners about their preferred building height, what they'd be comfortable with in the downtown. And the circled images, what was adopted into the city center district after that plan was completed. That was 3 stories with a 3rd floor setback to diminish the perceived scale of the building. So when you look at it from the street, the 3rd floor is set back a little bit and it doesn't look quite as tall and looming, essentially. And that is a topic that back when that plan was adopted, we said we'd revisit it when the next plan was done. So we are going to be asking about that at the upcoming workshop to see if people's preferences have changed. Mixed use is another topic that we're studying. So in certain corridors of the city and in the downtown area, focusing more on form and design than use. And allowing for mixed uses can help drive or enable redevelopment of underutilized or obsolete sites. Can provide some more dwelling units as well. The module does include identifying a few redevelopment ready sites in accordance with the MEDC's Redevelopment Ready Communities program. We have a level of certification in that program right now, which opens up some state dollars for us, technical assistance. And one of the things that the MEDC does is it helps market up to 3 sites in a community that's engaged in that program. To get to redevelopment moving on those sites. And when we think about mixed use and where there might be some appropriate locations. Oh, wait, I'll stop there. This is our stopping point where we can ask questions, provide comments if we want to.
I do have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned building up, and I know that that's something that's on the horizon, right? You have projects potentially that you might want to consider that. What are the thoughts on that right now? What are your planning thoughts on that? Not taking into consideration what the workshops will bring out with the public hearings. Like, what do you guys,
Sure.
how are you gonna kind of push that?
Right, well, I don't know that we'll necessarily be pushing it. It's more that we're going to be providing people with some examples of what that might look like and how that might feel and allowing them to respond to it. But I do think that it's something that needs to be considered strategically. You know, you don't do it everywhere. It's not something that's always going to be appropriate. But we may be able to identify some locations where it actually is appropriate or helps us reach some other goal that we're trying to accomplish. And of course, we haven't established goals through the planning process yet. So I would say that once we've actually written out some goals, we maybe have a better sense of how additional height might serve one of those goals or not. But in general, it is something that we do need to be thinking about because, again, with a built out community, we don't have places to spread into. So if we're looking to grow and perhaps achieve a certain level of development, then that's it's pretty much the only direction we can look other than just covering more of a site. But, you know, again, we're not looking to, you know, be downtown Royal Oak or something where there's 12-story buildings. That would feel pretty out of character for Clawson. So we have to be cautious about how we approach that subject, right?
So as a planner, what would you feel would be comfortable in this community, given the current landscape?
I think thinking practically about how development occurs and the costs that are incurred when you're going up, I think 4 stories is probably something we ought to be thinking about in certain locations. And once you get beyond 4 stories, there are practical considerations for development that, like, there's kind of a leap you have to take in terms of the investment that you need to put in because of elevator requirements and things like that, and steel construction up to a certain level and then stick built from there. So I think 4 stories is something is pretty much what we would look at this point, because otherwise you're going to be making a leap to something quite a bit taller than that.
And then in what locations?
Well, we're about to talk about the corridors that we're going to be studying. So I can move on to that portion of it and we can talk about those corridors and see, you know, these are the ones we're going to be testing the ideas on outside the downtown.
So practically speaking, you're not looking at any of the RM districts, right?
Well, not specifically, no. We have the RM2 district, which is the one really.
It's the one, yeah. I
town.
mean, yeah, that's the only one.
But we're probably not gonna be building any more of those in the future. So So really, you're talking about the RM1, which has a 3-story limit right now. And it may be that is one of the districts that we wind up looking at, because there is some of it along some of the larger corridors. But you might actually have some locational criteria for going higher than that or something like
Okay,
that. It
so,
wouldn't necessarily be universal throughout the district.
so industrial wise, it doesn't make sense to go up for that particular use unless somebody wanted to decide that they wanted a headquarters on top of having an industrial space.
Yeah, well, so industrial, I'm trying to remember what our height limit is in the industrial.
Well, the other thing too,
right
we
now.
got to worry about, we mentioned it last night about the airport and what the flight restrictions are, right?
Right, yeah, exactly, because we've got small lots over in the Rochester Road corridor, which is where a lot of our industrial is, and you can't really support too much square footage because you just don't have any place to put the parking.
Yeah.
Um,
But what's the hotel that's on Maple? How many stories is that? Is that 4 or 5?
I want to say it's 4. So that's the BRD2 district.
Yeah.
And that's the place where you've got the most space.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be accommodate something like that, it would be over there.
Okay.
But of course, yeah, you have to.
Well, the closer you get
consider-
to Maple, the less you have to worry about those FAA restrictions.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's like a triangle that cuts in to kind of the middle of that corridor.
Yeah.
Um,
But again, I just to reiterate, it's not necessarily the inner neighborhoods that will be affected by that.
right, yeah, exactly.
Regarding some of the infrastructure conversation, going back a little bit, and I know there's a lot of emphasis on the infrastructure from the planning commission side on what drove why we wanted to update in the master plan, right? And, you know, we talked a little bit about how the master plan should identify approach to what should be prioritized, but I just want to also add from, you know, to expand on that it should also provide more, but also a decision-making process
Right.
to help guide that prioritization. You know, from the past couple of rounds from developing the capital improvement plan, you know, it was based off of individual ratings by department heads, which is fine, but I think also that there needs to be data behind that, right?
Mhm.
So what work are we doing behind the scenes, you know, between capital improvement plans to evaluate our infrastructure? You know, as an example, one of our infrastructure discussions during the planning commission, when we were talking about roads and sewers, at least the map that we were looking at in terms of the sewer ratings, it was, I want to say almost a decade old. Right, and with respect to Pacer ratings, you know, there doesn't seem to be a regular pattern in which we conduct them, right? In terms of rating our roads, and so, you know, I think we should also provide some guidance into the frequency of that evaluation to help feed our decision-making process.
Sure, yeah, I think that is part of the framework that we're building, definitely is, you know, there's an interval there that we want to strive for. And ultimately it might be a rolling interval where each year a different quarter of the city area of the city happens, and it happens on a 7-year schedule or something like that. It could be something like that rather than like every 7 years we do the whole city or something like that. But yeah, that is part of the framework that we want to develop is how are we getting our information that supports our decision making.
And I know you may not know this, but with respect to our Pacer ratings, do we know if we're performing them in accordance with the TAMC? They asked that we do it with 3 representatives, one from the state, one from SEMCOG, and one from the local agency. And I don't know if if we're doing that, or if it's just what AEW is doing.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you offhand, but we could always ask AEW how that's conducted.
I can get that answer for you and include it in those comments that we'll be providing to the planning commission soon. I know there's still some open questions that the commission has that we'll provide that answer to.
Okay, thank you. Because that can certainly open open up some avenues in terms of additional funding opportunities, right? Because
Sure.
if we're on top of our PACER ratings, that further enables us to for additional federal aid for some of our roads. Right,
Right.
so there's that opportunity. I know you talked about tax revenue, increasing taxes for roads, but there's other outside sources, and there are things that we can do to set us up for success to, so that we have those funding opportunities.
Right, yeah, grant funding helps move those projects along a lot. So anything that we can get from outside sources definitely helps. So moving into those corridors, we have the West 14-mile corridor. This was identified for mixed use in the last master plan, but zoning's never changed. There's never been a district developed for that or anything like that. So there's office zoning, there's B1 zoning, there's RM1 zoning, there's and it's kind of all mixed up together through the corridor. So just thinking about this corridor from a sort of holistic standpoint and what its potential is, what's there now, is where we're headed with this one. Does that mixed use designation from the last master plan still make sense? What are some actions that we can take to actually move that forward if it does? The North Main corridor is another one. This is largely planned for office development in the last master plan, and demand for office has sagged a lot. So seeking some greater flexibility in terms of the planning for this area is what we're looking for during this update. What could this area actually be? How does that contribute to the rest of the city? Office just isn't the most likely path forward for this based on the current trends right now. So I think we have to revisit this area and think about what it really could be. The BRD1 district, which I mentioned before, is in the South Main corridor. So this is south of downtown between Normandy and Nakota. This is another area where there's a real grab bag of things down there. Some very lively sites, and then some sites that have been vacant for a very long time. Just need to think about this area. Is the BRD1 district meeting its original intent? We go back to the master plan where it was originally established. And of course, there's an intent statement right in the ordinance for what the district's trying to accomplish. Are we accomplishing that? And is there something that we can do with the district in order to push that forward if we're not? Can we make adjustments to drive positive change? And kind of the same questions for that BRD2 district over in the Crooks and Maple corridors. Are we meeting the original intent? Some of the largest taxpayers in the city are located in that corridor. It includes areas that are further from neighborhoods than anywhere else in the city. So you've got a lot more potential distance from single family homes here if you're building close to Crooks. It's a unique area of the city, and we have to think about the industrial legacy of that area and compare that to the intent of the BRD2 district and think about how we want to adjust the plan for this area going forward, based on what's there and what we'd like to see there.
What's the occupancy rate over in that area?
It's pretty high. There's not a lot of vacancy.
Mhm.
And in fact, industrial vacancy in Southeast Michigan is about 4% right now. It's extremely low. There's very constrained supply for industrial land and a lot of demand.
An office vacancy?
office vacancy is very high. I don't know the exact number, but it was. Well, the last time I looked, it was somewhere in the 30% range. It was a lot. So. Yeah, there's a lot of demand for industrial, and actually really in the last year, demand for industrial has shot up even more because of certain federal laws. That have brought a lot of industrial activity. To the states that previously was going overseas, so. It seems like that's only gonna be, the competition for that space is only gonna get more intense. So,
Is that the long-term projection?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, unless there's some sort of economic calamity that slows activity down. It seems like that's just an upward curve.
Yeah.
You know, the demand for industrial space.
Okay.
So if we can meet some of that demand here, that could be.
Yeah, we've been offshoring for decades. Seems like it's starting to come back.
Yeah, it is to a degree.
Okay.
More so than it has at any point in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
One of our other areas, modules that we're looking at is parking. Doing this in the downtown master plan and in the general master plan, but in both plans, we're looking for locations where supply is constrained and identifying opportunities for additional parking. And we're also developing a framework for assessing our parking requirements relative to true demand. So, as I said last night, most Michigan zoning ordinances have their roots in a couple of model ordinances that were developed in the 60s, and they included tables with required minimum parking. And those tables are still in most ordinances. Now they've been modified here and there. We've changed standards, we've added rows to the table. But in general, they were all still at one point based on the same table from the 1960s. And there's not really a whole lot of clarity as to where those original numbers from the 60s came from. So some of them are far too high and some of them are, probably in the right neighborhood, and some of them are probably a little too low. So we really want to develop a framework that's going to give us a chance to set some more reasonable numbers that are based in some sort of practical modern reality. And the planning commission did discuss this a little bit last night at, I don't think it'll be the next meeting, but the meeting after that, we're going to be bringing them some additional detail on this item. There are resources that we can draw on, such as the Institute of Traffic Engineers, parking generation manuals, but those resources have their flaws, and we need to make sure that we're doing this for Clawson, and they kind of have numbers that are just sort of blanket applied nationally in those guides. So we need to consider that they may not necessarily be 100% tuned to our context. So we can't just plunk a number from a national publication and stick it in our ordinance and be done with it. We have to think a little harder about it. And there are some fairly capital intensive studies that we could engage in if we really wanted to. But we'll be putting all that in the framework and sort of saying, here's the low hanging fruit way of doing it, and here's the more kind of Cadillac version of it, if you will. Sustainability and resiliency. The Sustainability Committee completed and the Planning Commission adopted a sustainability framework early this year. It established a very extensive list of goals for further study. And what this sustainability and resiliency plan portion of this update is going to do is develop an action plan around the goals of that framework. So that'll be used as the basis for ultimately for ordinance changes, zoning and otherwise, and also probably some advocacy efforts as well. How am I doing on time, Andy?
That's 51.
All right, cool. We're pretty much right on the same pace we were on yesterday. The Baker and Shalm sites are another module. This is a small module. The school district has some RFPs out for redevelopment of those sites now. work was done on a draft update focused on those sites, but wasn't adopted. So the new plan is going to reflect the school district's planning for those sites essentially. The goal is more families of children moving into the city and the school district, broadly speaking. The downtown plan update. So the last downtown plan has led to real results in the form of new development. And as downtown evolves, plans need to move with it. So there's been change since the last plan. We need to assess that change and whether or not we need to tweak the direction of the plan based on what's happened since then. Over the course of 5-year timeframes, oftentimes you do a plan and you go back out and the place looks more or less the same. That has not happened in downtown Clawson. We really have had a lot of movement down there. So it's a good time to be looking at the downtown plan again and making some decisions. And at the November workshop, we're really going to be looking at building height, public art, district boundaries, and the 14-mile road reconfiguration. Some narrowing of the travel lanes and adding some parking to 14-mile road and getting people's impressions of those things. So join us on November 14th if you can. Like I said earlier, we'll be getting some promotional information out about that soon. And another pause for questions and comments here.
You mentioned narrowing travel lanes.
Mhm.
So what particular travel lanes are you talking about?
So east-west lanes on 14-mile. The lanes themselves probably won't actually get narrower. It's just there'd be fewer of them. One travel lane in both directions, in each direction, with some sort of center space that could serve as a turning lane at certain locations and might actually have some sort of median type function at others. Perhaps it could facilitate mid-block crossings or something.
As we had talked about it last night, and it just kind of occurred to me, are there any alternatives to what had been discussed? One of them in particular came to mind was St. Clair Shores and what they do with their downtown. It's rather unique. Whether or not that could be done on 14-mile or.
Yeah, we have to work with the physical constraints of the space, of course. So I'd have to look at what they've done and yeah, of course, we've got plenty of benchmarks to work off of.
Sure.
Lots of downtowns have done this kind of thing recently. So
Essentially, if I recall, I'm just trying to grab some screenshot pictures from, as we're discussing this, that they have a section that's basically independent. That's used to be of their main travel lane that they've got dedicated, and they've got a concrete partition, and then you've got the travel lanes independent, right?
Sure.
So it's not necessarily, included in with the roadway. But anyway, I'm just curious whether or not that's, you've seen other locations similar to that. I haven't. Quite honestly, and I'm not sure what the effective was of that and whether or not there's other alternatives in examples someplace else, but
yeah.
certainly don't want to turn around about.
It's probably not enough room for that. Yeah, we want people to be stopping so people can cross the road.
Joe, you mentioned that the master plan needs to account for the growth in downtown and the downtown's master plan. But what are some of are there any big opportunities that jump out at you in terms of how the overarching master plan can adjust, accommodate, or enhance what's happening in downtown?
So is that how the general master plan? Well, I mean, part of it, we're talking about 3 corridors that are directly adjacent to downtown, and how they feed into the downtown is something that we need to think about when we're thinking about the future of those corridors. So one thing that we've talked about going north on Main is between here and downtown. there's two travel lanes in both directions, and we have a 25-mile-an-hour posted speed limit and a road that looks kind of like an airstrip. And people don't drive 25. In fact, they kind of race away from the light toward downtown. So we might be able to grab some parking on pavement that already exists there and start to create the downtown feel even before you get to downtown. And I signal to people, okay, you need to be slowing down now because there's vehicles parked and there's lots of activity and there's things going on here. And so that's one thing that comes to mind offhand. But in general, just thinking about what do we do with these areas that abut downtown and feed directly into them? What would benefit the core of our community the most in those areas? Is it more residents? Is it more supporting businesses? Is it some sort of mix of both of those things? And it ultimately probably is a mix of both of those things. But I think that we have a fair amount of opportunity in all three of those places to create an environment that supports the downtown and grows along with it. Anyone else? Let's move it along to this. This is the information for the master plan survey that's going to be live through the end of the month. You can use that QR code to go there on your phone. You can also just type in the URL on a computer as well. And again, we do have paper copies if you are, for whatever reason, unable or just not comfortable taking an online survey. If you'd like to do it on paper, any municipal building that you visit will have a few copies of that survey. That's it.
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I am Jeff on the DDA. We wanted to just express our support for exploring the road diet on 14 miles. I think it would be extremely beneficial. I think that the viability of businesses, I think the viability of that northwest corner, businesses like what is coming into the northeast corner, need more on-street parking to survive. So I know there's going to be a good amount of ancillary considerations, but I think, I just wanted to say, I think it's something that I would be in favor of exploring.
And Joe, we'll be scheduling a workshop to kind of flesh out some of these ideas, and that'll be not this Monday, but the following Monday.
Yeah, we're gonna be
DDA.
talking to the DDA about how we want this workshop in November to go and bringing some ideas.
And Giffords will be working on some concepts as to how that road could look like, and we're getting some information from SEMCOG also to have a little more data to add to this conversation.
Right. Yeah, we've got a parking study that's pretty fresh too for the downtown. Also that I think supports the idea of adding quite a bit of more parking.
Anybody else? Then I guess we can say thank you again for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thanks for
and
being here.
We can adjourn our meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Sure.
Thank you, Joe.
So yesterday you did this thing with your hands when you were talking at some point. They had a presentation. It's my only observation of the difference. And that's the question. Yeah. Studies are appropriate, would it? I think it's like
Make everybody move down.
Perhaps that.